Welcome to the Vision by Protiviti interview. I'm Joe Kornick, Editor-in-Chief of Vision by Protiviti, our content initiative where we examine big topics that will impact business, the C-suite, and executive boardrooms worldwide over the next decade and beyond. Today, we're exploring the future of work, and we have a wonderful guest to help us do that in Jared Spataro, Corporate Vice President of Modern Work at Microsoft. In this role, Jared leads Microsoft's modern work team, which is dedicated to helping every person and organization navigate the shift and adapt to the new world of work. His team is driving research to help predict and shape what the future of work will look like across industries, while also delivering new products and features within Microsoft 365 that will enable everyone to thrive. For this one, I'm happy to turn over the interviewing to my colleague, Joel Hammer. Joel is a Protiviti Managing Director and Microsoft Lead. Joel?
Thanks, Joe. We're excited to be here and looking forward to our discussion today. Jared, again, appreciate you taking time to meet with us today and discussing the topic of the future of the work. And specifically, we're looking about 10 years out, right? This is a vision piece for us that we like to do and focused in this area. Just first question here, Jared, is we thought by now that we'd be past this point, but unfortunately, I think we have to start with the COVID question, right? And positive horizons on the forefront, but it's been 2 years now since the disruption. And I know that Microsoft has used this unprecedented time valuable in terms of learning. What are your biggest takeaways and how it impacted work? What do you think that legacy will be? And how do you think the last 2 years will shape the next 10?
Boy, a really good set of questions. I'm glad we go all the way back to COVID because I think my experience now has been after looking at so much data in different ways that you do have to go back there. And what I mean by that is the following. Going into the pandemic, I think the thing that I never would have guessed is that the way this would have changed work is that it has changed the people that work. Or in other words, what the data seems to point to, ours and many other studies that I've seen, is that the people who are going back to work here as we come out of the pandemic are not the same people that used to go to your office. Like, they're totally different people. In some cases, we've hired a lot. At Microsoft, as an example, we've hired about a third of our company. We've had about that much turnover over the 2 years. But even if you take the same workers, they have really changed in the way they perceive life and the things that they value. The research that I've seen really indicates that there's a rethinking of the why of work. So what role does work play in my life? And ultimately, I think, in my own words, I think that this experience, this shared experience that we've had is going to be every bit as impactful as the Great Depression was on my grandparents, my great-grandparents, as an example, as the world wars have been. It really shapes the way people think. We're seeing that play out already right now in that people are rethinking things like well-being. They're rethinking work-life balance. They're thinking differently about geography and work. 2 years of being able to work away from the office for information workers at least has them thinking differently about what they must go into an office for. So there's a lot of changes that we have seen, I would say, kind of psychologically for workers. And I think that's going to be the lasting impact. We're going to see those psychological changes, even many that we don't recognize right now, play out over the next decade in the labor market. And those shifts in the labor market are going to show up in the office. And we can talk more about that, but I think that kind of sets the table for I believe, what will be the lasting, the most durable impact of what we've experienced.
Yeah, great input there, Jared. I agree with you. As and we'll come back to some of those topics here in a couple of questions because I think you set some great points there. As we look at, really the pandemic accelerated several of the trends that were already in motion. We look at hybrid, we look at remote work, teleconferencing, collaboration, software. We think specifically of Teams and Viva and Loop and others. How do you envision organizations continuing to incorporate some of the most successful pandemic strategies in the future?
Well, I'm biased on this one. Full disclosure, and it's my job to sell technology, so I have a technology perspective. The way I express it is to say that the most common trend I see coming out on the technology front of the pandemic really is this idea that leaders across the world and organizations of all sizes have realized, we need the equivalent of a digital fabric that binds the organization together. That used to be a visionary statement. Let's paint a picture of this digital fabric through space. It's not a visionary statement any longer. It's just simply this. My employees expect to be able to work from anywhere. I'm never going to have all of them back in the same physical space again. how do I create an environment where we can keep on working, keep on being productive, move the ball forward, regardless of where people are physically, and I would actually add regardless of where they are in kind of a time continuum as well. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing is this across time and space, that those changes will really impact creating new patterns. As I think about how to create that, underlying kind of digital fabric, if you will, Teams is our answer here at Microsoft. We think we've got a winner in that we've combined different workloads, chat, meet, call, collaborate, automate into a single platform. We're trying to build on top of that fabric. And I think many companies, even if they don't choose Teams, are going to have to do the same type of thing. They're going to have to figure out, how do I connect everybody from my frontline workers all the way up to the executive suite so that we're operating together. And I think that what I would call the increased clock speed of business will demand this. You just can't wait for the water to get to the end of the row with paper-based or even kind of email-based, as an example, processes. You're going to have to speed up the clock speed of your organization. So that's kind of how I think it'll start to play out, and then there's still a lot for us to learn.
Great input there. And coming from a farming background, I understand the water getting to the end of the road there, Jared. As can you talk, as we look at Teams and we see Teams, right? We've had a lot of success as a firm with Teams and implementing them at our clients and for ourselves. We've seen recently, right? We're hearing about metaverses. We're hearing about virtual spaces. Can you talk about the potential of mixed reality capabilities such as metaverses and virtual spaces inside of Teams?
Oh, very happy to. Yeah, it's all the buzz right now for sure. Let me start even before answering the specifics on what people would consider to be a metaverse application or not, and just say we should pause for a moment and recognize that over the last 2 years we have all operated not in physical spaces but in digital spaces. At least we've gotten work done in, at least again, the information worker context through these shared digital spaces that are pretty miraculous. I was pausing the other day and thought, wow, what if the pandemic would have hit, even 5 years before, certainly 10 years before? We just wouldn't have had the technology to keep things going the way that we have. It would have been a very different picture, I think. Then if you start there and say, well, we have been operating in a digital format or in digitally shared space, where does this go? And that is where, at least in the business context, the metaverse picks up. We kind of see 3 specific click stops, if you will, of metaverse coming into these digital spaces. The first will be the increased use of avatars. We'll see this in Teams here over the next few months, that we'll be adding avatars into Teams so that you can choose not just to have your camera on or off, but actually choose to have a digital representation of yourself. That may seem like sci-fi. Our work in what we call our human factors lab seems to indicate that this will have some amount of virality to it, that people, when they see others using these avatars, they start to recognize that there's value. So that's one thing. The second thing that we'll see is the adoption of what I call augmented reality scenarios. This is where essentially what we're doing is we're bridging the physical and the digital in a way that helps people just get tasks done, at least in a business context. We're already seeing these types of things. We see Teams integrated, for instance, into helmets that's putting a clear glass onto which we can project different images. And then ultimately, if you use something like HoloLens, we're actually able to project onto reality digital figures, whether that be objects or markup. And this is going to be a very fast follow part of the metaverse, because there's real value for customers here. We see them using it in manufacturing type scenarios. We see them using it in field service type scenarios. It's just so much more practical to bring in an expert from thousands of miles away and have them literally work on the reality that's right in front of you by diagramming things out and teaching you what you need to do. So I think we'll really see that as kind of the fast follow on to those, onto the avatar space. And then finally, we'll move into more virtual reality immersive spaces, and that will be a thing. And I think in many ways we'll see companies experiment with that. We'll see our most leaning customers really pick those things up, but they'll be doing it because it will be a way for them to start to create a deeper connection between people. And so again, I think there'll be a real business purpose behind them, as opposed to just being used because they're eye candy or neat. And so we'll see it play out. I do think you should get ready. We have some survey data just from a recent survey we've done that shows that employees are quite ready. A high percentage of them say that they feel very comfortable in digital spaces and are ready for more innovation. I think companies at large kind of they're still not quite sure what to make of all of this. And so it'll be interesting to see it play out.
Yeah, I know. I'm certainly very interested and excited for that and to see those things. We've done a few things at our firm with avatars and leveraging those to train and put real world examples in, and it's amazing how once you get into that scenario, it's real. And you kind of shut everything else out and you're in a real space. And so really looking forward to being able to take more of that. You talked a little bit ago about Microsoft and hiring, almost a third of your company over the last 2 years. As we start talking about talent, we're seeing that there's talent shortages out there on the horizon, or even today. And we hear, maybe it's overused, I don't know, but we hear the Great Resignation, and that's coming on. And those two, right, seem to create somewhat of a troubling combination. In your opinion, what will organizations need to be aware of in shaping their workforce of the future? And what skills and capabilities will be in the highest demand? And how do you see artificial intelligence playing in that space?
Boy, some really great questions. Just let me give you the source of a lot of what I'll reference here over the next minute or two as I answer. We have been doing a number of different studies. Our broadest based study is something we call the Work Trends Index. So that's a study where we go out and ask a battery of questions to 30,000 people across 31 countries, just trying to get a sense for their perceptions, their experiences. And then we follow that up with smaller pulse surveys, kind of between 9 and 10,000 people on special topics. So that's where some of what I'll tell you is coming from. As I think about this, I guess the thing that I would say is, again, it's important to start with the fact that people have changed. In particular, the why of work has changed, and you can translate that economically into a worth it equation for every individual. They're trying to figure out what makes it worth it for me to work for you, or to sacrifice what I do and give you my time in exchange for what you're going to give me in terms of compensation. That equation has changed and is still changing. What we see companies, or what we see individuals telling us, is that more than ever before, that they value, for instance, culture and values amongst organizations. And that's both a factor, I think, of the rising generation, where that has been more true even pre-pandemic, but also how people have felt and how they've changed over the course of the pandemic. We have not only seen culture and kind of values become a big thing, but just in general, how a company gets its work done. So we see people commenting on what type of technology is chosen and what that seems to indicate about the thinking or the mental models of an organization. That's certainly coming out even already in the press as a thing. Speaking more broadly, I guess I would characterize, as I think about where companies are and what new skills are required, I would characterize it into two sections. First, I would say that for leaders, there's a new set of skills that are definitely required. These set of skills not only are digital skills, that's kind of a given, but leading in this day and age, at this moment, I think requires a lot of empathy. It requires an ability to use culture to shape and drive outcomes, perhaps as effectively as some of our predecessors have used process, maybe in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I think it requires an understanding of the psyche of people and the cultural context in which we live. It is a brand new environment. I think every leader has to be, an incredible communicator in new formats and new media. And as you think about those skills, boy, that is a profile for a new type of leader. So I would say that's the first category. And then for workers themselves, employees themselves, there are a whole number of new technologies that you have to learn how to master. You have to learn how to not just use Word, Excel, PowerPoint as used to be written on people's resumes, but you have to be fantastic at video conferencing. You have to be, really adept at using chat and understanding the etiquette that goes with that. You have to be able to put it all together for real-time and asynchronous collab. And I think there's a whole bunch of new skills that will be emerging and really new etiquette. Maybe one last thing I'll leave you on this is just running a hybrid meeting where some people are online, some people are together with you. I mean, the most basic things of, who do you look at? How do you look at them? How do you make sure you get input from everyone? Those types of skills, we're all going to need to learn together as we put work back together and move into physical spaces again.
That's great. As Jared, you mentioned a little bit there about the leadership and some of the important talents and skills that they're going to need to have. We saw, where you had shared recently how companies are needing to be more proactive in that space and planning for what you talked a little bit about today. Some have created strategic C-level positions specific to the future of work. Do you think that's the next executive role to emerge? And if so, where are those leaders coming from?
We definitely see it. I mean, there's data on LinkedIn that indicates that the future of work is not only a topic that's being talked about, but there are job titles out there that are increasingly using that phrase. We see hybrid being used increasingly. I think there was over a 300% increase over the last few months of the word hybrid just in things like job postings. So all of these things that we're feeling are making their way into the labor market. I think it's good to have someone who's thinking about the future of work. If I'm honest with you, and I have a chance to sometimes meet with CEOs and their directs, to talk about these issues, I think it's fine. I think if somebody wants to appoint someone, on a senior leadership team to do that work, it's good. But what I would tell them is, hey, you can't escape the fact that reshaping your entire operating model, that really rethinking your culture, is really the job of the senior leadership team. You can't just delegate that to one person. I think it's only when you wrap your head around that truth that you're going to be able to do right. Because I guess I would say that, with all this technology, with all this change, it is not a given that this is all going to go well. I think it's going to take real leadership. Now, I'm positive about the future. I'm really optimistic about the future, that we can get it right. But instead of kind of delegating it to people in your team, I would just so much encourage leaders to take it head on and recognize that they should roll up their sleeves, not be afraid to tell people they don't quite know, but be very willing to get in there and learn as they go.
Yeah, I agree with that. As we look out there, right? We are in that market of placing resources with different organizations and have a significant vision into that. It seems, as we look at the gig economy, and networks of more nimble and collaborative teams, that's going to be what the future is going to look like. As far as from your perspective, how do we get there with those teams and current talent models? It seems maybe they really don't do it today. And it would seem finding, as we look through that, what are the things that you're seeing with teams and individuals and the important skill sets that they're going to need to be successful as we look out into the future?
Yeah, increasingly against the backdrop of that faster clock speed that we talked about in just about every industry. So competition is more fierce, cycle times are shorter. That really sets the stage for what we're doing. We are increasingly seeing, at least in our research, what we'd call more adaptive teaming. So this would be this idea of bringing together cross-functional teams whose job it is to solve a problem end to end. You need experts because you need so much depth in domains, but then you need a way to put that together into really a synthesized solution, as opposed to here's what marketing, here's what research tell me, and now we've got to figure out what to go and do for real. So that is definitely becoming an emergent pattern. I think you're right. It's not just that one part of our overall work system doesn't support that. I think talent models don't support it, but I think the labor market, isn't quite there. I really think that, our systems in place to pay people and bring people on. I certainly think our IT systems, all of these things are going to need some work. So the way we think about it is simply this: the future, if I could choose one word to say, this is what the future is all about, it would be flexibility. It's flexibility in how you work. It's flexibility in when you work. It's flexibility in where you work. Today, a lot of the focus in the media, at least, is on where. We're all talking about going back to the office and what that will look like. But you're hitting on the point of how you work will be just as important. And I think that companies, this is part of that reprogramming of the operating model, will need to think about the agility that they want to program in. Now, the good news is we can see from our analysis of things like telemetry that people are being able to get in touch with each other faster than ever before. This digital fabric allows them to, one ping, and I've got Joel, and I can quickly get, the information I need from him, where previously I might have needed to bump into him or find him or send him an email and wait for him to reply. So we are finding ways to use the tools, but we're going to have to put it all together. So I don't have a satisfying answer. It says, here you go, here's how it's going to work. I would say it's really important for people to recognize that this new pattern of teamwork, this new pattern of getting work done, is a part of that how. And that I would just focus everyone on flexibility. Recognize that that is going to be the key word over the coming 2 to 3 years that will set the trajectory for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Great input there and insight. As far as, there's going to be a lot of business leaders, board members that view this video. What's your call to action to business leaders and board members? You've talked a lot about the culture. You've talked about making sure that they're prepared, that they're setting the term there. But what's your call to these leaders, and what should they be taking right now to make sure that they're prepared when it comes to the future of work?
Boy, I think I have to start with the moment, because I think the moment sets the tone for everything else. I would just, if I have a chance to speak to someone who has decision-making authority at any level, I like to emphasize this is literally a once in a generation moment. You have to recognize that. your kids and your kids' kids are going to look back on this moment just like we have looked back on the Great Depression and the World Wars and say, huh, what changed? With that in mind, then, I think that if you hold the authority to shape culture, to think about structures and processes, you can't take this as a moment of like, oh, let's get back to business. Let's get back to how we were doing it. Instead, you need to think, there could be winners and losers out of this. In my particular setting, in my industry, what's going to set apart those winners and losers? What are the key things, and there aren't many, that really are going to differentiate the people who emerge out of this situation stronger and performing better than everyone else? I can't, we have to go down by industry and perhaps even, by the competitive environment in a small cluster of companies to determine that. But if you've determined that as a leader, then I think you take that and turn that into a plan for your culture, a plan for your processes, a plan for your organizational structure, and you put that together into a new operating model. So simply put, I would say recognize the moment, get a plan that is grounded in the things that will make a difference over the long term, and then execute with alacrity. If you do that with real energy, I think people will recognize, wow, that's a leader. She knows what she's doing. He knows what he's doing. And they will follow leaders who have that clarity of vision. It's really a rare opportunity.
It really is to be game changing, as you said, back where our grandparents and parents had back in the Depression, World Wars, looking back on those things. All right, final question here, Jared, is as you look out to 2035, and we're just shooting out here, right? But do you have any bold predictions about work? We've talked about a lot of things, but when you compare where we're at today and you look out to 2035, what types of bold predictions would you make as it relates to future of work?
I've got one that I really feel like I have a lot of confidence in, and here's how I'd phrase it. Presence and how we project our presence to each other and share presence is going to become increasingly mediated digitally. That doesn't mean that physical presence won't be important, it will be. But we are going to get to the point where time and space matter less. They won't not matter, but matter less. And we will have the tools to project presence so that with that presence, we can create real human connection. I think that's the thing that has been missing in a lot of the commentary, is that presence is a means and the ends will be human connection. Because I think all the great things we have done as a human family over the course of history have been done when we rally together and when we really bring the best and the brightest and the strongest into a unified way of doing things, getting things done. All the things we've done that have been amazing have been done that way. So with presence mediated digitally, we'll be able to create connections, new connections we've never had, and it will be that human connection that drives things. So, I think we'll see holograms. I think we'll see, the ability to project in ourselves into all sorts of physical and digital spaces. Again, all in the name of getting that connection we need across time and space so that we can really engage in some meaningful endeavors. So I think we'll look back and we'll say, yeah, it all started there. It started in 2020, with lowly video conferencing as the beginning.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Jared, I was at one of the Microsoft partner conference and saw where one of the CVPs over marketing, who does a lot of marketing for Azure, I was so impressed. She put a HoloLens on and stood back and she introed it, right? But then took a step back and it projected a hologram, and the technology had learned the influx of her voice, and she started her hologram, delivered her message in perfect Japanese. And I just thought that is going to be cool. And so I look forward to those things and also the other things that we talked about today, but really appreciate you taking time to meet with us. We're excited about this as a firm, as an overall people of the world, to be able to experience this future of work. And truly, thank you for your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Back over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Joel. And thank you, Jared, for those outstanding insights and that look into the future of work. I certainly enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you did as well. Thanks for joining us for the Vision by Protiviti interview. We'll see you next time.